In 1946, not long after the end of the Second World War, a book called Nightmare Alley was published in the USA. It tells a tragic story of a carnival worker who rises to showbiz stardom, but ultimately causes his own downfall. Pulitzer Prize winner Michael Dirda has described the book as having raw Dostoevskian power. Unsurprisingly, it was a bestseller and quickly adapted into a movie that was widely released the following year. However, the movie flopped. How come the film failed to leave general audiences impressed? After all, Nightmare Alley was a competent studio production. 20th Century Fox even built a fully working carnival that was 10 acres big and hired over 100 attractions and carnival people to add further authenticity to both the set and the star-studded cast. By and large, the film seemed to follow the rules of classical Aristotelian theatre, but that might have been precisely the problem. Aristotelian theatre isn't exactly thrilling to watch. Here's why. Aristotle held the opinion that the world around us should be humanity's focus instead of stuff like Plato's realm of ideas. In Aristotle's view, any artist worth their salt should attempt to imitate reality as faithfully as possible, ideally gathering the meaning of things and offering a bigger picture of reality. Aristotle called such imitations of reality mimesis, which was something he copied from Plato, who actually got the idea from Socrates. And if there was anything those three philosophers agreed on, it was their mutual dislike of art. They thought spectacular art was spoiling the youth. The presence of spectacle would only distract the audience from mimesis and thus from reality. Therefore, as far as Aristotle would even allow some spectacle, it was supposed to be confined to what's realistic. But even though Aristotle was obsessed with these realistic imitations of life, he still wanted stories to also tell these grander narratives about life at the same time. Because of this, Aristotle placed more importance on plot, characters, themes and thoughts, and words than on stage or melody, believing that stuff like designing the stage was a job better suited to a mask maker than to a poet. Poets, according to Aristotle, ought to busy themselves with composing abstract text, dislocated from the stage or the melody, in an attempt to tell that grander narrative of life. Alright, enough of that. Maybe you think Aristotle's theory could produce some interesting results, and you think my mockery is uncalled for, and perhaps you're right. However, even Aristotle himself admitted that in practice audiences prefer to see some spectacle rather than a dry imitation of reality. On top of that, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle might have been great philosophers, but they didn't even like art, so why should artists pay much attention to them? Regardless of whether this idea of mimesis made for thrilling theatre, I'm not convinced it makes for engaging cinema. Let me demonstrate with one brief example from Nightmare Alley. Think about this. How do you end a film? I don't mean the general ending, I'm specifically referring to that very last shot, before the closing credits roll and the screen fades to black. There aren't any rules for that, and so you're technically free to end it however you want. But if you voluntarily imposed Aristotelian restraints on yourself, you will end up in a bind, because by the time of the final shot, the plot should have already come to a conclusion, the characters will already be driving off into the sunset, and the stage is about to become obsolete, so you can't afford to do anything new with them. Your best option is to reflect on the themes and thoughts using the last stage and characters in view, but without creating too much spectacle, remember? And so in the final shot of Nightmare Alley, we hear a 2-sentence summary of the 2-hour story that we just watched, upon which music swells up and a door is literally slammed shut in our faces.
Good night, boys. Lock up.
Even though this is admittedly funny, and technically ending with a bang, this studio-imposed ending is far from exciting or spectacular. I think we can all agree that this cinema of mimesis isn't doing much exploration with film as a medium. Luckily for filmmakers though, Aristotle hasn't been the only person with ideas about theatre and performance. Let's take a look at another film, 1964's Onibaba, aka Demon Granny, to better understand something called the theater of cruelty. As it was proposed in 1937 by French surrealist Antonin Artaud in his essay No More Masterpieces, the theater of cruelty prioritized spectacle over mimesis in every aspect possible. However, contrary to what the name might suggest, this form of theater is not about the kind of cruelty people inflict on each other. Instead, it's primarily about the cruelty imposed onto us by material objects, like the mask in Onibaba. As Artaud wrote in his essay, we are not free and the sky can still fall on our heads. Above all else, theater is made to teach us this. To best achieve that impression of the material world, Artaud believed the senses of the audience ought to be engaged and sharp, closing the gap between your seat and the stage as much as possible. As you can expect with this approach to theater, designing the stage and music for a performance does become a job for a poet rather than a mask maker, whereas the abstract meaning of words becomes less relevant as more emphasis is put on the spatial and sonorous effects of text and the spoken word. With regards to Onibaba, we could discuss the many different ways in which the stage and the sounds are examples of theater of cruelty, or the ways in which Onibaba makes use of depth and the wider aspect ratio. However, let's once again focus on one moment, the final shot. Or rather, the final 6 shots. You see, while Onibaba ends on a similar moral note as Nightmare Alley, it portrays it differently. Instead of ending when the story is over, it ends as the titular demon granny is in mid-air, likely about to fall down a dark hole, but not quite yet. By first jump cutting to and then extending the portrayal of both her daughter-in-law's successful jump and her own Icarus flight through both slow motion and multiple takes, the audience is exposed to the imagery of the jumping demon granny for far longer than would be realistic, even compared to how the film portrays it with other characters. By creating what is called a pregnant moment, where a lot of emphasis is put on a single moment in time, questions are evoked. What are we looking at? What led up to this? And what will happen afterwards? So, where Nightmare Alley ends by setting the audience away, Onibaba uses its last breath to grip the viewer one more time. Wouldn't you agree that Onibaba makes much better use of the medium-specific qualities of film to convey its message to the audience than the theatrical stiffness of a Nightmare Alley? Watch this next clip and decide for yourself.
Well, he certainly fooled me. I never recognized him.
I'm a human being. I am a human being.
How can a guy get so low? He reached too high. Good night, boys. Lock up.